Hi, I'm Pastor Dick Stadler, and I'm here again to talk about Sunday readings with Ann Carter and with Tim Carter. And we want to talk about the readings for Pentecost 5, the fifth Sunday after Pentecost. We're going to be looking at the Old Testament lesson, which is the story of Saul's death and the report to King David in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1, and also verses 17 to 27. And then we're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 15. And finally, the gospel lesson, we're continuing our march through Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43.
Reading from 2 Samuel. After the death of Saul, David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jashar. A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain, may no showers fall on your terraced fields, for there the shield of the mighty was despised, the shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, the sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You are very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished.
So let's start with the Old Testament lesson about the death of Saul. He was killed in battle together with his son Jonathan, and a messenger comes and brings the message to David, who now is the new king, because God has anointed him to be that and to follow up. Tim, do you have any questions that you think the person in the pew is going to want to ask after they hear this story read to them?
Well, I don't know about I had a few kind of questions. I remember a lot of this from, Sunday school and from other Bible studies.
Good. Your Sunday school teachers would really be impressed.
Well, well, I think
and grateful.
One of them is here today, so.
Oh, okay, very good.
Anyway, but no, I remember a lot of this. This one feels familiar, and I remember getting into the story of Saul and David and Jonathan and all that. One thing that really did jump out at me that was odd is somewhere in here it says that it was written in the book of Jashar.
Yeah,
it struck me as real weird. What is the book of Jashar, and where is that? And what do we know about that text? And then, if we want to just get into a little more detail in the story of Saul and Jonathan and David. And
I can't find any extant copies of the book of Jasher. I don't know anybody who has ever found it archaeologically or whatever. So we just know it by that name. And there are other books like that referred to in the biblical text that we just don't know. They're just referred to, and we've never found a copy of it. So I think that would be...
Would that have been like a popular or a well-known book amongst the people then, that it's a reference, or is that
it's hard? It's hard to say, because it talks about the chronicles of this and the chronicles of that also, they'll quote, and we'd have to read those books either, and so
we just don't know.
We just don't know if it was widely distributed or if it was just something that he wanted to refer to. Yeah. Now you would assume the readers would recognize it. Otherwise, a writer is not going to put it in his work, you know.
Right.
Yeah, it is mentioned one other time, and that is in the book of Joshua.
Yeah.
Joshua 10, verse 13, after the battle that Joshua had, where the sun and the moon stood still, it says, is this not written in the book of Jashar? And so it's almost, I look at it as the Bible is the bare bones. And then I'm going to refer you now to this book over here. Often it says in Kings and Chronicles, are not the other acts of the king written in the annals of the kings of Israel and Judah? Well, maybe, but where are they? Well, they're gone. They're just gone.
I have a question about this text, this story, because it's troublesome to me that the Amalekite who brings the message to David admits that he's the one who finally killed King Saul, because Saul asked him to, probably to spare Saul, who was wounded from being tortured by the armies of the enemy when they found him. And it says the chariots were close by, so that means they were moving in on him, closing in. And David has him executed. And so I'm saying to myself, why would David execute someone who was only doing what the king had asked him to do? And it makes a certain amount of sense to preserve him from being tortured by the enemy armies if they catch him alive. And you have a thought about that, right?
Well, I did. When I read it, and of course you don't know the emphasis or the attitude that is expressed in words because you can't hear the tone of voice or see their faces. But I always thought the Amalekite got there and bragged about it as though, David, I did this for you. And I know that this will solidify your kingdom. And now in essence, I want a reward. And David was having none of that. He refused to kill Saul. He had opportunity to kill Saul and he refused to do it. And he wasn't going to accept a gift like that from a foreigner who had no right to do that. I think the support,
I think the support for that thought in verse 10, where it says, as he's telling David the story, I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord. So now you've got the crown. And maybe we're reading too much into that, but I think there's the possibility he was looking for some advantage from the new king, and that he was expecting the new king to pat him on the back and say, oh, good for you. You got rid of the competition. You got rid of the guy who is standing in my way. But David is, I think, a type of Christ here. Saul had treated him like an enemy. Saul had tried to kill him repeatedly. And every time David had an opportunity, as you said, Ann, he refused to do that because he was the Lord's anointed. And Jesus cries out from the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And he's praying for his enemies. And here you have David, who is mourning for the death of the man who tried to kill him and for his son, whom he loved and who loved him. And so there is a wonderful picture here of a balance, of emotional balance that says, I can feel bad when someone who has abused me and misused me dies. And I'm not going to just be doing cartwheels and rejoice. He was the anointed of God, and I'm sorry he went astray. I'm sorry he did all the bad stuff that he did, but he was still God's man and the one he chose. So I think there's something good there that we can draw from that for our daily lives, that you don't, what's interesting also is that 3 times the same phrase is used over and over. How the mighty have fallen. How the mighty have fallen. It's become a proverb in our day, and people will often quote that. And I think maybe what we're being reminded of is that hubris can be more dangerous to a victor than the enemy. And so the mighty, if they don't stay connected to God, can create their own undoing. And so be careful when you are the mighty, because you may not be so high. and you may be cut low. And so there's some interesting reminders in this Old Testament text that people can look for, but also look for some parallels with the gospel lesson today too. But on the way to the gospel lesson, let's take a look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8 verses.
A reading from 2 Corinthians. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. So we urged Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But since you excel in everything in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I am not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he is rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. And here is my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work, so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it, according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable, according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard-pressed, but that there might be equality. At the present time your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn their plenty will supply what you need. The goal is equality, as it is written, "The one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little."
Verses 1 to 15. And we included all 15 verses to cover both lectionaries that we draw from, so that whichever verses you hear, we'll have a chance to talk about. And here you have Paul making an appeal to excel in the grace of giving to the people of the Corinthian congregation. And he uses the Macedonian Christians, who are poor people, as an example for them to follow. And the question that we need to kind of sort out as we read this is Paul trying to stimulate the people of Corinth with jealousy that poorer people are giving more than maybe they are giving to help the saints in Jerusalem? Because apparently there was a need occurring in Jerusalem. And so Paul was taking gatherings from all of the congregations in Asia Minor and trying to bring it back. Or is he simply reminding them, look, some of the Christians have very little, but from their little, they gave as much as they could. And I'm not making this a law, he says at the end of this reading. I'm not making this a command. So you do what fits you and be motivated by the knowledge that you're going to be helping brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. So it's a kind of a neat reminder during fundraising efforts. Mm-hmm. How does the church raise funds for its projects and for its missions? Do you try to constantly have them compete with each other, who can be the biggest giver? Do you hand out free Cadillacs and free bonuses if you give a certain amount? Or do you simply remind people of the starting point, Jesus, who also, though he was rich, became poor, humiliated himself in order to give us the riches of heaven. And so now we follow his example, and maybe we can learn from watching how other people give. Any other thoughts that you have on that or questions that you have, Tim?
Well, there's nothing like putting somebody's name on a plaque to set apart the rich from the poor. And there's nothing more, maybe debilitating is too strong a word, but to have a phone call that, well, we know you're not in the top tier givers, so you're the next line down. So we're just hoping that you will. Well, don't judge me because I don't make as much money as you.
Yeah.
And it becomes a, I think I like that Paul said at least twice, balance. There's a balance. If you have family needs and you need all of your money right now, then you give later. He's not asking anybody to go destitute. He is asking you to help someone who needs it. And when you need it, he's expecting those people to give to you. It's all about balance and fairness in the kingdom. That as we talked about before, if the kingdom is an activity, it is each member of that kingdom making sure that all members of the kingdom have enough. And when everybody has enough, then jealousy should be less prominent. And people have just their core needs taken care of, then they can get on with living productive, fruitful lives, I think.
Well, and he takes out compulsion as the motive to coerce them to give. In verse 11, when he says, now finish doing it as well. So they were already started gathering an offering for the saints in Jerusalem themselves, the Corinthians. But then he says, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. And that's the whole point. If you don't have, we're not trying to make you feel guilty about that. But if you are able, as much as you're able, then please participate and please join us in the effort. Mm-hmm. We saw that exemplified vividly when we went to India and would go to these village congregations where the people would sit on the floor, they'd worship, and after the service, they insisted on feeding us a meal. Now, we knew where that food was coming from. That was coming from their own houses. And that was food that they could have been serving to their families. But they insisted because of hospitality and because of their generosity and their joy in doing it, that we enjoy a meal with them. And so it was just a reminder about how people with very limited means sometimes are really good examples of generous giving when you don't expect it. Yeah. Anything else on the epistle lesson there? Then let's take a look at the gospel lesson.
The Holy Gospel according to Mark. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was free from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, she told him the truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher any more?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat.
Which is in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. Last week, we saw some pictures of Jesus going from Capernaum across the northern part of the Sea of Galilee to the eastern coast. Now he's coming back, and he's coming back from the eastern coast back to the Capernaum side. And when he gets back to Capernaum, a ruler of the synagogue, Jairus, begs him to help his daughter. And on the way to helping her, he runs into another woman of need. So what questions does that raise in your mind as you think about the dynamics of both Jairus's request and now this lady's hope that just by touching the hem of Jesus' garment, she'll be healed?
Well, I mean, that's kind of, I guess, my first question is, where did she get the idea that touching him was going to heal her? Was this just desperation, or was this a rumor going around that that all you had to do was touch him in order to be healed? And then why was she the only one healed? Because the picture I have, I guess, is that they're in a big crowd. There's a lot of people jostling, and this woman touches him, and she is healed. But would then that make everybody else healed as well who bumped into him or touched him, or was it something about her intentionality that led her to be healed? What exactly? What's going on there, kind of beneath the surface of this story?
Go ahead, Anne.
Well, I think it was intentionality. I think that's a very good word. I think that's what she believed would happen. And God recognized that that's what she wanted and needed, and he granted it. Because even the disciples said, but you see the crowd pressing in on you, it's verse 31. How can you say, "Who touched me?" They didn't get it either, because, and how she got that notion? In the first 4 chapters of Mark, we hear about how Jesus was healing everyone. And so she is such a wonderful, interesting character. Because she was bleeding, she was not allowed in mixed company. She was really not supposed to be there. And she has enough chutzpah that she makes her way through the crowd, making everybody who touches her or who she touches unclean. And she comes up to the rabbi and she touches him, and she's in a lot of trouble. She'll be ostracized even more. She will be socially a pariah because of what she dared to do to the community. But that's the beauty of Jesus, is he embraces her and brings her back into community with everybody in the town. And it has to do with her faith. She believed it, and it happened to her. And Jesus says that many times now, that the centurion, your faith has, and the woman in Tyre Sidon, there are many people. Your faith is what saved you, what healed you. There's something in that relationship between what Jesus offers and our willingness to dare to believe that things happen.
I have read some indications in rabbinic literature that the hem of the rabbi's garment was considered to be very special. And just like the tzitzit, the cords that they put on the corners of their garments are to remind Israel of Almighty God, as they look at the blue string that's included in them. That may have been part of her influence, is that if that belief was strong in the first century, she may have put that together with all the stories that she had heard about his healing in Capernaum and thought, well, then there's hope. I can do that. But you're right, Ann. She overcame unbelievable social obstacles because she was not allowed to sit on any benches because that would make the bench unclean. And anybody who sat on it after she sat on it would be unclean. So she must have been ostracized socially for 12 years of her life. She couldn't go to the synagogue. She couldn't go to a lot of social places. And so, and knowing human nature, sometimes people might have made up nicknames and made fun of her and said, don't get close to her, don't let the children get close to her. So she would have been very isolated. But Jesus allows this force. He knows right away what's happened. And he says, your faith has made you well. And so there's the intentionality that he recognized in her, that she trusted that he could do something for her. And he says, you're not going to be disappointed. Yeah. But then they go on to Jairus's house, where Jairus knows his daughter is very sick and about to die. And a servant says, she's already dead. So what? Don't bother the rabbi anymore. Okay. Nothing he can do, And Jesus says,
she's dead.
Yeah. Well, and Jesus says to Jairus, only believe, do not fear, only believe. And so he's asking Jairus to do, who's the ruler of the synagogue, what this lady who suffered for 12 years had already done. And so he's using her as the example to urge Jairus, don't give up hope, keep holding on. And they do, they go forward. He takes only Peter, James, and John and the two parents up to the room. When he announces that she's not dead, she's only asleep, everybody laughs him to scorn. So why doesn't he throw open the doors of the place where she's dead so they can all see it and witness him bringing her back to life? Why does he keep it a secret?
Well, that was my question, is why did he only bring those people up into the room? And also, why didn't he do it like with Lazarus and just say, hey, come on out? Why is this different? So
or the son of the man from Nain who was on the funeral pyre, and they brought him out and he did it in front of everybody there.
Yeah. It may have been the time in the ministry. Lazarus was very late in his 3-year ministry, just before his crucifixion. Here, he may have thought, if people come up and watch me do this, they're going to watch how I hold my hands, how I pray, whatever I do, and they're going to superstitiously think that they can do the same thing if they just do the right actions. And we know there are people who tried to do that. Simon Magus tried to buy the miracle working power of the apostles, and they cursed him for it. But that may be one of the reasons. I'm not going to expose this to superstition or to greed. And so he only takes the inner circle, the 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John. But it's amazing. He just simply takes her by the hand, and with the word, the powerful creative word with which he created the whole world, he simply says, Talitha Kumi, young lady, arise. And she does. She gets up, she walks, and then he says, feed her, in order to make sure she's sustained right away. And maybe to prove that she's not a ghost, because there may be other reasons, but it was.
I've always found it interesting that the woman bled for 12 years and the girl is 12 years old.
I did too. And I wondered,
what does that mean?
What's the significance? Is that intentional, or is that just have to be a coincidence? But that is a very interesting
parallel of some kind.
Of some kind, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, after doing it, he strictly charged them that no one should know this. And Tim, you've asked questions about that in previous miracles. Why does he do that? Well, my guess still is the same, and I know the other scholars have other reasons, but I still believe that early in his ministry, he knows the blowback that spreading the word that he's the Messiah and that he's here is going to create among the religious leaders. And according to the Father's blueprint and the Father's timetable, this is not the time for that yet. And so we'll just quietly make our little inroads and little things, and we'll just do our preaching and so forth. But the time is coming when I'm going to do like I did at Lazarus in front of everybody, okay? And like a youth of Nain, I'm going to do it in front of everybody. And I don't know where to put the youth of Nain resurrection relative to this in time. So when you compare the different gospels, that's a little hard to do always authoritatively. But any other thoughts or questions on this particular episode? It's a wonderful parallel of two stories that involve faith from a little bit different perspectives, but still faith is at the center of them. Now, what I'd like to know, I wish I was a CNN reporter or a Fox News reporter, one of the two, and could ask Jairus, so what did you do after he brought your daughter back to life? Did you start talking to the other synagogue leaders? Did you become a follower of Jesus? We're not told a thing about Jairus.
No.
After this. And our information age makes us want to say, what happened next? What'd you do, Jairus? Any other thoughts or questions on these readings? Some wonderful readings for people to kind of gnaw on and to think about. So we want to thank you for joining us, and we'd ask you if you have the opportunity to subscribe to this, and you'll get notifications every week of when the next one's coming up. And we also ask you to hit the little like button down there, and also tell your friends and share this on social media if you found it worthwhile. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to you being with us during our next Talkin' Sunday readings. Bye-bye.